Have you ever looked back and wondered, why did that have to happen? Why did life close one door when you were ready to walk through it? Follow me for more stories like this. Stories that remind you that sometimes what feels like loss is simply life's quiet way of guiding us home. In a valley wrapped between old green hills, there lived a young man named Evan. He worked with his hands, carving wood into small figures of animals and birds. His father had taught him the craft when he was a boy, saying, "Wood is alive, my son. If you listen long enough, it tells you what it wants to become." Evan loved his work, but business was never steady. Some months, he sold enough to buy good food and oil for his lamp. Other months, he barely earned enough to keep the fire burning. Still, he believed that patience and effort would one day reward him. Then came the storm. It struck one night without warning, rain falling like silver arrows, wind shaking every door and roof in the village. By morning, half of Evan's little workshop was gone. The roof had collapsed, and all his finished carvings were broken or washed away. He stood there in silence, staring at the wreckage. His hands trembled. The years of effort, the tools, the wood, the figures, all ruined in one night. For the first time, Evan felt anger rising inside him. He clenched his fists and shouted at the sky, "Why would you do this? I worked so hard. Why take everything away from me?" But the only answer was the wind. In the weeks that followed, Evan's spirit dimmed. He tried to rebuild, but his heart wasn't in it. He stopped carving. He stopped singing while he worked. Every time he passed the workshop, a heavy weight pressed on his chest. One morning, as he sat by the river, he saw an old traveler resting on the opposite bank, a gray-bearded man with kind eyes. The old man called out, "You look as though your thoughts weigh more than the stones in this stream." Evan sighed. "Everything I built was taken by the storm. Years of work, gone. How can I call that fair?" The old man smiled gently. "Fair? The rain falls on the rich and the poor alike. Fairness is not the law of the earth. Growth is." Evan frowned. "Growth? There's nothing left to grow from." The traveler stood, walked to a tree nearby, and struck his walking stick against it. "Do you see this tree? It once stood where the river now flows. When the flood came, it tore the soil from its roots and carried it here. But look, it grew stronger, its roots deeper, because it had to start again." He looked at Evan kindly. "Perhaps your storm did not destroy your path. Perhaps it only turned your feet toward a new one." Then the old man left, crossing the river as quietly as he had appeared. For days, those words echoed in Evan's mind. Perhaps it only turned your feet toward a new path. He began walking beyond the valley, toward the hills where travelers often passed. There, he found pieces of driftwood washed down by the same storm that had ruined his shop. Twisted, smooth, beautiful in shape. He picked them up one by one. Something in their weathered lines spoke to him. He took them home and began carving again. At first, the carvings were small. A bird's wing, a curled leaf, a tiny fox with one ear missing. But soon, the figures took on life. They looked as if the wind itself had shaped them. People in nearby villages began to notice. One merchant stopped by and said, "These are unlike anything I've seen." "How do you make them?" Evan smiled softly. "I don't. The storm does. I just listen to what's left." Months passed. Evan's carvings began to travel farther than he ever had, carried in wagons, shown in marketplaces, bought by people from distant towns. What had once felt like destruction had become the beginning of something entirely new. But Evan never forgot that night, the storm, the loss, the anger. He would sometimes visit the remains of his old workshop. The walls were gone, and only a single post still stood, leaning against the wind. He would rest his hand on it and whisper, "Thank you," because now he understood. One evening, years later, a young boy came to Evan's door. His voice trembled. "Sir, I've seen your carvings. They're beautiful. But how do you keep creating when things go wrong?" Evan looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "When things go wrong, it only means life is carving you for something new." The boy tilted his head, unsure, and Evan smiled. Everything happens for a reason, though the reason often hides until the rain stops. He took one of his smaller carvings, a bird made of dark driftwood, and handed it to the boy. "This bird," he said, "was once part of a tree struck by lightning. But now it flies." That night, Evan sat by his window, watching the clouds drift over the moon. The air smelled of rain again, but this time he didn't fear it. He knew that storms would always come, and that sometimes the winds that tear our world apart are the very ones that guide us where we were meant to be. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and whispered to the silence, "Everything happens for a reason." And in that moment, the valley felt at peace, as if the world itself had nodded in quiet agreement. If this story touched your heart, remember, every ending hides a beginning. Stay patient, stay kind, and trust the way life unfolds. Stay well and stay peaceful.